Hello and welcome to today's AP4D webinar on Lives and Livelihoods, Improving Pacific Maritime Safety. My name is Melissa Conley-Tyler. I'm the Executive Director of AP4D, the Asia Pacific Development Diplomacy and Defence Dialogue, and I'm joining you today from the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people here in Canberra. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge any Indigenous participants who are joining us today. We're delighted to have so many people who are joining us for this webinar. We've had more than 100 people register either to join us today or to listen to the recording afterwards. And we're delighted because we think this is a truly crucial topic. If you think about what matters in the Pacific, the lives and livelihoods and what they depend on, safe maritime transport is key. So we're going to, we're delighted that we have people joining us from each of the different communities to focus on this important topic, from defence diplomacy, development, law enforcement, law, trade, economics, and many other areas who are making their time. And we're looking forward to taking you through the arguments in the paper, how it was created, and what we hope policymakers might do with it. So in terms of what we're going to do today, we'll start off by just telling you a little bit about AP4D. We're then going to have a Pacific perspective on why maritime safety matters, why it's so crucial for lives and livelihoods. We'll then outline the process of consultation that we've done over the last 5 months with experts in maritime safety from across the region in Australia. And then we're going to hear some policymakers' response at the end. And we're delighted that we're going to be joined by Eliza Boughton from the Australian Maritime Safety Authority and from Senator David Shoebridge, who's the Green spokesperson for Defence and Veterans Affairs. But as I say, I should always start by just quickly introducing AP4D and who we are. We're still a very new organisation, so we've only been going for 2 years. In that time, we've been lucky to work with a number of the people who are here on the call. So can I say a big welcome to everyone I saw registered who've worked on our previous papers, whether it was on Timor-Leste, on the Pacific, on Southeast Asia, or on illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. AP4D was established as a platform to bring together excellent thinking from non-government experts across a range of sectors and to then bring that to policymakers. So we act as a way to get great ideas into government, to give a vision for what Australian statecraft could look like, and then to give examples of how the different tools of statecraft can contribute to that end. And so we were originally funded by the Australian Civil Military Centre from the Department of Defence. And more recently, we're delighted that Office of the Pacific at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has also come on board. We're housed at ACFID, the Australian Council for International Development, so one of the peak bodies for the development sector. So if you put that together, we are a properly tripartite initiative, bringing together defence, development and diplomacy. And if you're interested in the work that we've been doing, you can see the whole range, in very large range now, of papers that we've been working on to illustrate the power of bringing people from different perspectives to talk about how we can use different tools of statecraft to advance our shared future with the region that matters so much to Australia. So, as I say, we were delighted that after our first year of seed funding, Office of the Pacific saw the benefit of what AP4D is doing in terms of providing this conduit for ideas to get into policy making. And so we're working with Office of the Pacific for the next 2 years to convene, consult, come up with ideas, and then help that move into their policy space. So to just say a little bit about why Office of the Pacific is involved and to help us launch the paper, can I introduce Laura Fresh-Cardenas, who is from Strategic Communications in Office of the Pacific in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Melissa, and it's terrific to be here. As Melissa said, my name is Laura Fresh-Cardenas. I'm the Director of the Pacific Strategic Communications section here in the Office of the Pacific at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. A key part of our Pacific engagement, of course, is taking a whole-of-nation approach and drawing together all of our national assets, economic, development, defence and diplomatic. So it seemed to us that a collaboration with AP4D was a perfect match. And we have a very strong shared interest in analysing and exploring policy issues of importance to our region. So as Melissa said, our partnership provides us with a platform to consult and develop and test ideas with a wide range of experts across both government and non-government sectors, and in particular for us, listening to experts from the Pacific as well. So this kind of collaboration is really important for OTP and for DFAT to help better inform our policy and program decision making, and also to ensure we're capturing the best and brightest ideas, and most importantly, listening to and responding to Pacific priorities. So I'm very pleased to be supporting the work of AP4D and the paper that we are launching today. What does it look like for Australia to be a partner on maritime safety in the Pacific? Of course, Australia promotes long-term sustainable solutions to regional issues, and this is part of our commitment to supporting a peaceful and prosperous and resilient Pacific. We recognise that maritime safety and sea transport are major concerns for the region, and we are committed to supporting maritime safety in the Pacific. So the paper we are discussing today will be an important tool for building and sharing our understanding of maritime safety in the Pacific context, what is already happening, what others are doing, and where and how we can best work together. On behalf of the Office of the Pacific, I'd like to thank Melissa, AP4D, and all the many contributors to the paper. I very much look forward to hearing the panel discussion today. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, Laura, and I feel exactly the same. So I'll turn now to Rhonda Robinson, who's the Director of the Geoscience, Energy and Maritime Division at the Pacific Community. We thought it was really important that we start anchoring this discussion by why this matters, why this is such an important issue for the Pacific. So over to you, Rhonda.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And please let me know if my audio or video is not coming through clearly. Okay, Naka. Naka, and thank you very much for allowing us space and time this afternoon to talk to you all. I'd also like to acknowledge and congratulate the Australian Council for International Development for hosting this Asia-Pacific Development, Diplomacy and Defence Dialogue. And we're pleased to be a part of it today. Just perhaps to preface some of the further comments I'd like to make by framing what the Pacific situation is like. We in the Pacific, the work we do covers the Blue Pacific Ocean, which is made up of 42 square kilometers of ocean and covers 24 countries, including Australia and New Zealand in this space. Thousands of islands, lots of people living in these dispersed, isolated communities at times. So the importance of maritime safety as a lifeline for communities is really critical and essential. We face diverse yet similar constraints. Each country, each context is different, but collectively we face some similar constraints in growing our economies, reducing poverty, improving maritime connectivity and safety is incredibly key to all of this. And it's complex. At the center of this is the vast Pacific Ocean, of course. And so we as the Pacific Community is a technical and regional organization that is member-led and member-driven. We work with and alongside other agencies in the Pacific region. And so see ourselves as essentially an extension of the national government around the spaces that we are supporting and delivering on priority areas of concern, including in this space, in the maritime transport space as well. So, when we talk about maritime transport in the Pacific with that overlaying commentary that I just made, acknowledging the importance it is to us and how difficult and expensive it is to provide as well. So it's important that we coordinate and collaborate where we can in the region to address these issues. And for us as an intergovernmental regional organization, that is a big part of the work that we do. Listening, understanding our members' perspectives, and trying to address those perspectives in the actions that we then follow through and deliver on. So what is our role if we were to think about our role as the Pacific Community or SPC? It's lined up in a few different ways. We support advisory support and technical advisory support on various maritime related areas, in the area of legislative and policy drafting, for example, capacity development and training, promoting the role of women in the maritime sector by way of regional maritime organizations and associations, and convenings of our heads of and ministerials as well in the space. We also support and service a few secretariat functions in the region, such as the Central Pacific Shipping Commission, for example, and the Pacific Women in Maritime Association. And these are just two illustrations of that sort of support. We also acknowledge that our members ask us to provide support to them directly as well in these spaces. So on top of the regional public service we might provide at the national level, we also are asked and called upon to support our members more directly at the national level for their priorities as well. So some of the things that sort of speak to this are the International Maritime Organization has long partnered with us as SPC to enhance the capacity of our Pacific countries to implement their international obligations as flag, port, and coastal states as required by these, IMO conventions and instruments. We have been able to support the setting up of a regional presence here for the Pacific, housed out of SPC and based here in Suva, and support junior professionals in some of the countries as well. This support has been extended to the officers in the junior professionals in the countries by Australia, in fact. And then there's other things as well that tie into that. We've been able to enjoy the benefit of some flexible support to this space over the last several years, but we've recognized that of late, this hasn't been as resourced, this area of maritime safety in the Pacific hasn't been as resourced as we might have needed to ensure the members' priorities addressed. And so there is a call from the Pacific ministers recently out of the regional ministerial meeting to, address that resource issue, that resource capacity constraint that we need in the region to continue to address this critical area. And so there's a lot of work and affirmative work that we need to do in that space. We know our oceans don't have borders. We may have maritime borders in place, but really all of this sort of work transcends those borders as well. So we have to continue to innovate and look for those innovative solutions to increase the connectivity to our people and look at the maritime sector into the future as well in the decarbonization that needs to also occur. Pleased to note that the AP4D options paper reflects key priorities in the sector, and that some of those have come out of the May ministerial meeting as well from Port Vila, and in particular, a collective commitment for, again, effective cooperation, coordination, and determined actions for maritime transport regionally and internationally from a national setting, including and especially around this issue of maritime safety. So, as the lead agency around maritime related matters, we recognize our responsibility here to ensure that the members' voices are heard and actioned in the way that it needs to. We're really welcoming and pleased to partner with the myriad partners that are operating in this space and exploring other partnerships as they come along and emerge and strengthen themselves as well alongside the work we're doing. So just to maybe wrap up, if I can leave this discussion with three things. The Pacific region is vast, and maritime transport and the ocean is intrinsic to our work in our communities. With that, we need rapid acceleration of investments in genuine maritime safety programs that increase access and safety at sea. And we need innovation and focus-driven investments that are inclusive to ensure every Pacific person has access to the growing sector. And I'll leave it at that. Nakwa level.
Oh, thank you. We very much appreciate those comments. And if I may say, we really appreciate the contribution and the input we receive from the Pacific community in these consultations. So if I can acknowledge Ore, Dimek and Omedete, who are all involved in these consultations and I think made a great contribution. So to explain a bit more about this, what was the consultation process? How did we arrive at the recommendations? I'm going to turn now to Heather Rathel, who's the program lead at AP4D, who's been responsible for this paper, and she can tell you about the many months of consultations that took place to lead to what we have today. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Melissa. Just going to share my screen here. Just bear with me a second. Is that coming through for people? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm really delighted today to be sharing with you the latest AP4D paper on what does it look like for Australia to be a partner on maritime safety with the Pacific. Now, this paper has been the result of a fairly extensive consultation process over the last 4 to 5 months. We started the process in February, beginning of this year, with some initial research before we went to a public dialogue where we invited a range of experts from both Australia and the Pacific, and in fact more broadly than that as well, to come together and share what they saw as the kind of priorities, the challenges, some of the barriers and some of the issues around maritime safety in the Pacific. And you can see from that list there that participants came from a range of different organisations and academic institutions. And it was a really wonderful opportunity to hear from the experts as to what they saw as the issues that needed addressing. Building on that dialogue, we then scheduled a series of smaller working group consultations where we met with different experts to kind of flesh out those issues and those priorities and think about some of the ways that Australia could support the Pacific in addressing those priority areas. And we were lucky enough to have a really fabulous group of people with really deep expertise in maritime safety, not just in the Pacific, but also globally, share their ideas and expertise, and we're incredibly grateful for them and their input. We then took everything that we heard from those consultations and all the great ideas and expertise that came out during those consultations to form this book. We synthesised that into this book. And what I'd like to do now is, that's sort of the process that we went through over the last 4 months. But I think what I'd like to do now, and what I think most people on the call are particularly interested in, is hearing about what those consultations brought up and what came out of those discussions we had with experts on maritime safety. So without further ado, I'll jump straight into that. And I guess what we did, as the way we framed those discussions and that dialogue, was to start by thinking, what's the vision? Like, what would we want the maritime safety sector or area to look like in the Pacific, and how could Australia come alongside our Pacific neighbours and really support that? And I think in framing that vision, it's really important to note that the Pacific region is a region where more than 50% of the population live on remote outer islands. So this means that maritime transport is the only form of transportation for many, many Pacific people. The 2050 strategy for a Blue Pacific outlines a vision for a well-connected region with inclusive, affordable and accessible sea transport for all Pacific people. And in recognition of this, there was kind of consensus amongst everybody that we spoke to that in order for this to be realised, the domestic passenger vessels need to be upgraded, and the Pacific needs to have access to affordable, accessible, maintainable and reliable vessels that are appropriate for the country contexts. Now, a couple of different ways that this perhaps could be achieved were discussed, and we can get into that in a moment, because there's some really interesting things that came out of those discussions. But then I guess alongside that idea of accessible vessels and reliable vessels was this idea of moving towards a fossil fuel-free Pacific, which is something that the Pacific has put forward as a ambition. There's also a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of capacity building and training, as well as looking at legislative and regulatory frameworks that sort of embed or pin down that maritime safety environment. So that's the sort of vision that came out of the discussions that we had. And once we'd set that vision, we were able to talk about, well, what are some of the ways that we can move towards achieving that? What are some of the pathways where Australia can support Pacific maritime safety? And the first one, which I've just really briefly touched on, was looking at how Australia could support the Pacific in access to safe and reliable passenger vessels. Clearly, there are a range of options to achieve that, but sort of the three main ones that came out through consultations was looking at perhaps international partners could donate a fleet of modern ferries to the region. This has been done, or a similar thing has been done previously through the patrol boat program under the Pacific Maritime Security Program. We could look at supporting development of a shipbuilding industry in the Pacific so that there was capacity within the region to build ships locally and also for maintenance and upkeep to be done within the region. And then there's this third idea that looking that Australia could work with the Pacific to leverage climate financing and use that as a source of investment to upgrade vessels. Now, clearly, each one of these options would require significant investment over quite an extended period of time. And there's pros and cons to each of those options. There's not one perfect solution. There's no silver bullet to this issue, but there are merits and difficulties associated with each of them. I'm not going to dig into that right now, just conscious of time, but it is spelt out in the paper in quite some detail. So I really encourage you to have a look at the paper and read through those different options as they're presented and kind of engage with some of the pros and cons on each of those. So I think it's also really interesting to recognise that the Pacific has stated, or certain countries within the Pacific have stated that they would like to transition to a fossil fuel-free Pacific. And just in July last month, July 2023, the IMO issued its revised greenhouse gas reduction strategy, which called for called to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the shipping sector by 2050. So clearly, the scale of that ambition is massive, and the Pacific will need international partners to come alongside to help achieve that. And there's a real opportunity for Australia here to be a leader and really show that it is a partner to the Pacific in both climate change action, but also in maritime safety. So that was another one of the pathways that was identified. Then sitting alongside that is looking at how can we promote appropriate legislative and regulatory environment that supports maritime safety. And Australia already does some work in this area, and there's lots that could be built on and replicated. So looking at things like what we've learned from the development of PNG's Small Craft Act, supporting the IMO model regulations on domestic ferry safety, and a range of other things that could be done in this space. I guess as well, just recognising the scale of work that needs to be done in maritime safety. The Pacific does need support from international partners, and there's a role Australia can play in supporting those strong partnerships between key agencies and looking at how we can improve donor coordination to maximise available resources. I'm delighted to see so many of our friends from New Zealand registered for this event, and there's certainly things that we can learn from their Pacific Maritime Safety Program and look if aspects of that might be replicated in countries where it's not currently being rolled out. And then, of course, support for the regional organisations such as SPC and some of the wonderful work that Rhonda Robinson was talking about earlier, and the need for that long-term consistent investment in those programs. And then last but certainly not least, it is a technical area. There is that need for ongoing capacity development and training, both in shipfaring and operating vessels, but also in port safety, marine domain awareness, across legislative and regulatory frameworks across the whole kind of bandwidth of things. There's a need for ongoing training and capacity development, where Australia has considerable expertise and experience that they can offer in this space. And then, of course, the need to encourage private sector engagement, which is a difficult thing to do, given sort of the remoteness of parts of the region, but perhaps there's a role there for Australia to encourage in that investment. Now, I realise that's like a really whirlwind tour of the paper, and I've only really touched on a couple of the key points. The paper is a lot more detailed and provides some really interesting sections looking at links between maritime safety and the SDGs, looking at women in maritime. And so again, I really encourage you to download it and have a read and engage with it. Back to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Heather. And yes, we don't want to tell people everything that's in it, or they wouldn't go to the website and read. And we do want you to follow the link and to see, in particular, some of the pros and cons. This is not a paper that says that there is one way to solve the problem. It says there are a range of different ways, and we give the pros and cons so that policymakers can think a bit more about which are the ones that they might want to pursue. Which is why we have some policymakers with us today. So we're delighted to be joined by two policymakers broadly, one who's an official who works in this area and one a parliamentarian. So you can get quite different views about, you know, what a paper looks like this might have, what sort of effect it might have. So first of all, if I can call on Eliza Boughton, she's the Manager of International Engagement for the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, which of course has links with maritime safety all around the world. So I hope Eliza can tell us a little bit about the work that you already do, and then I hope you'll talk a little bit about the ideas in the paper and what your reaction was to them. Over to you, Eliza.
Thank you so much, Melissa. My name is Elisa Bott, and I'm the Manager of International and Domestic Engagement at AMSA. I'd like to begin first by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land I'm speaking from, the Ngunnawal people, and pay respects to their elders past and present. I, of course, extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today, too. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at today's launch. I'm extremely excited. As Ms. Robinson touched on so fantastically, the Pacific region is home to the largest concentration of small island developing states on Earth. Our region is absolutely vast, and Pacific Island nations rely heavily on shipping and seas for trade, tourism, and to maintain social and personal connection between island communities. In short, sea transport is a way of life in the Pacific. I'm delighted to see through the launch of today's paper a strong commitment to improving maritime safety in the Pacific. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority regularly cooperates with our regional partners to improve implementation of international standards set by the International Maritime Organization to improve ship safety, protect the marine environment, and build search and rescue capability in our region. The focus on maritime safety of this paper is incredibly timely, as the International Maritime Organization continues to set up a permanent regional presence office in the Pacific, based out of the offices of the Pacific Community in Fiji. IMO is incredibly well placed to coordinate targeted assistance for Pacific states to improve ship safety and environmental performance. And I'm pleased that Australia has championed the establishment of the Regional Presence Office since the Pacific Community and Pacific Island nations first made the proposal. We're proud to play a strong role in supporting its establishment on an ongoing basis. Last year, Australia contributed funding to recruit 2 junior professional officers from Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands to work in the Regional Presence Office. We have also provided funding to support the development of a Pacific regional strategy for technical cooperation and to conduct a full maritime needs assessment for the region. The outcome of both will help inform the International Maritime Organization's development priorities in the Pacific for many years to come. While a full technical needs assessment is still a way off, we do have a sense of some priorities identified by Pacific states. Many nations have commented that they are yet to ratify key IMO conventions. Those who have may lack the resources to provide up-to-date domestic maritime legislation to give full effect to the conventions as they're amended. Maritime incident response capabilities and access to international liability and compensation regimes for shipping remain a gap. Passenger ship safety remains a major concern in our region, with a number of high-profile incidents in recent years resulting in significant loss of life. And of course, infrastructure, equipment, recruitment, training, and retention of personnel are always challenging for any organization, particularly those in developing nations. As Ms. Robinson touched on, the recent adoption by the IMO of an ambitious strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from shipping to net zero by 2050 will require intensive effort over coming years to operationalize, not only for large developed nations like Australia, but also for our small island Pacific nations. So how do we see that Australia can assist? We can continue to support the establishment of the Pacific IMO Regional Presence Office. The role a dedicated office will will play in leading IMO's delivery of technical cooperation in the Pacific region cannot be overstated. The Office provides an opportunity to establish a clear roadmap, one that ensures that partner efforts are aligned, targeting the highest priority needs and, where possible, avoiding duplication. Another possible approach is through the Asia-Pacific Heads of Maritime Safety Agencies Forum. This is a significant opportunity to continue to promote the interests in our region. APOMSA is an annual forum that brings together senior maritime officials from 28 member countries and 9 observer organizations. The forum's purpose is to maintain a strong understanding of shared maritime interests and challenges in our region and to identify and coordinate technical cooperation efforts. To date, 15 Pacific nations are members of APOMSA, and we're pleased that the outcomes of APOMSA tend to influence the outcomes of the technical cooperation programs established by the IMO each year. Australia hosted the last meeting of APOMSA in Sydney in June, where we welcomed over 100 participants from 25 nations, 15 from the Pacific. Australia, through AMSA, is the permanent secretariat of APOMSA. We play an important role in influencing the direction and the focus of the forum, and we're very, very happy to continue to cooperate with our Pacific neighbours to make the forum more meaningful for them as well. Like the Regional Presence Office, there's an opportunity to build on the expertise and capacity of APOMSA members to support our maritime development commitments into the future. This is just a very brief outline of some of the work that we are currently undertaking and can pursue further into the future. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to speak at the launch of this paper.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Elisa. I note as you were speaking, we've had an interesting comment from Sharon Kanawale, who's from the PNG Maritime College. And it's interesting how much she's, I think, backing up what you've been saying. She's expressing concerns about vessels registered in Pacific Islands being substandard, that we're really just waiting for catastrophic failures with vessel structures, which will lead to pollution and loss of lives at sea. And she's commending the role that AMSA can play to educate and train, to provide technical expertise to deal with some of these issues. So thank you very much. I'm conscious we have a wonderful audience group, so if there's anyone who would like to put any more questions or comments in there, please feel free. So I will now hand over to Senator Shoebridge. He's the Senator for New South Wales and the Green spokesperson for Defence and Veterans Affairs. We've been in touch with Senator Shoebridge for some time, and it's fantastic that we've got a topic that we can ask you to come and give your view on. So please, Senator Shoebridge, tell us your reaction.
Oh, thanks very much, Melissa. And I want to start by acknowledging I'm coming to you from Gadigal land here in Sydney, and pay my respects to those First Nations elders, past, present, and emerging in the land I'm on. And also, I'll just throw out an Australian domestic matter on the table. It's the day on which we had the date for the referendum announced to vote yes, and my party is doing what it can to ensure that we make that first step towards First Nations justice and empowerment in this country. But I also want to thank the Asia-Pacific Development, Diplomacy and Defence Dialogue for inviting me today to this launch of Lives and Livelihoods and how we can improve maritime safety in the Pacific. It's an excellent report. And I've got to say, I've found the contributions from each of Rhonda, Heather and Elisa absolutely thought-provoking. And I hope, in part, that's what this report is intended to be, thought-provoking, to get policymakers in Australia to sit up and listen to the demands that are coming so loudly and so clearly from the Pacific. Now, the report obviously highlights that safety is an often neglected aspect when we're talking about security in the Pacific. When we talk about safety, we're talking about a number of things. Yes, we're talking about the safety of the ships and vessels. We're also talking about knowing our children will grow up having a better life than us, that bad actors can't bully and coerce us. And it's about a community that fosters respect for each other and looks out for and listens to each other. And those are, I suppose, some of the issues I want to touch on today that have been drawn out in this report. Because the report is a really important corrective in some of our discussion about the Pacific. It's talking about, I think, a very positive role that the Australian government can take on maritime safety, security and cooperation in the region. And some of those core recommendations about common rules and regulations for shipping in the Pacific, making it more interconnected from a solid basis, stronger partnerships between Australia and Pacific countries, better and common safety standards across shipping in the Pacific that are actually enforced and providing some of those enforcement mechanisms, and Australia taking on a leadership role in training and shipbuilding to help be part of raising that standard and creating more economic empowerment in the ways that the Pacific connects to itself. So improving the safety and conditions of workers in the Pacific's waters is a matter that I've discussed many times with the Maritime Union in Australia. And for me, it's a great shame that the region has one of the highest per capita fatality rates in the world for maritime accidents. And I think few people in Canberra understand that, and it's often not a matter of discussion in politics. Also strengthening the role of women in the shipping industry, I think is actually a really important message that this report delivers. But also would like to talk in a little bit of detail about the concepts of maritime safety and climate change and the climate emergency that we're in. And once again, I want to acknowledge the positive aspects in this report. In Australia, taking a leading role in helping to decarbonise the shipping industry. And having those very clear goals for the shipping industry in the Pacific, I think is really important to lay that down. But Australia can't just lead by providing training and resources to our neighbours, because before I think Australia can really consider taking on the leadership role it could have, we actually need to catch up with our Pacific neighbours when it comes to climate. Shipping is responsible for about 2 or 3% of carbon emissions around the world. That's not insignificant, though. It's about the same contribution that Germany makes to carbon emissions. But unfortunately, we're not doing enough to get that driven down. In 2022, we know emissions from shipping went up by 5%, and about 99% of global shipping is actually powered by fossil fuels. All this is to say, we can't get to where we need to be in the Pacific without taking some bold action in this space. And it's our neighbours, Australia's neighbours in the Pacific, that have been pushing for that bold action, and sometimes in a vacuum, which Australia has left. So some of the initiatives that have been acknowledged, some of that work's been acknowledged in this report, such as the extraordinary work of our Pacific Island neighbours in getting the International Maritime Organization to substantially improve its greenhouse gas emissions target. The IMO's previous goal was about a 50% reduction of emissions by 2050. We know that was going to be part of contributing to climate chaos. That has been now significantly improved, largely through the advocacy and work of the Pacific nations, with the IMO now committing to close to zero emissions by 2050. I'm a Green senator. I don't much like close to. I like zero emissions by 2050. I think there's a lot of work still to be done, but credit to the Pacific nations for moving the IMO in that direction. Of course, one of the things that hasn't been adopted is the concept of a carbon levy on shipping. As the International Council on Clean Transport has pointed out, we know that international shipping will exceed its global carbon target, even with changes. And we know that there's been discussion of a levy on greenhouse gas emissions from shipping. Imagine if there was that levy in place and it was used as part of the economic package, which would allow for the decarbonising of the Pacific's shipping fleet. The World Bank has estimated that a pretty basic and modest levy on carbon emissions in the
Senator, we can still hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm terribly sorry, but you can still see me. My computer has just had a security, an urgent security update.
There it is. Well, we can hear you perfectly well. Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, I'm trying to get out of this. Done. I'm back. The World Bank has estimated that would raise between $40 and $60 billion a year, every year. Imagine what that could do for the kind of producing the outcomes this report has suggested. And the report's call for Australia to throw its support behind such a levy, I think is really important and timely. But, you know, our neighbours know that Australia is not doing the heavy lifting it needs to do. When Chris Bowen visited Fiji just recently, there was significant response to Australia's current trajectory on climate. And, you know, there was an ad in the full-page advertisement in the local newspaper urging Australia to do more on the climate crisis, largely to keep coal and gas in the ground. So even if by 2050 we had completely decarbonised shipping in the Pacific, and I think is a great goal, it'll be a hollow victory if we've got decarbonised shipping ferrying Australian coal and gas around the world. And we should acknowledge some of those complexities in the relationship between Australia and the Pacific. So Australia doesn't need to just lead. Australia needs to listen to our neighbours. And Australia needs to listen to our neighbours and promote a peaceful and connected Pacific. I'll finish with this. Much of the debate about the Pacific in Australia in the last 2 to 3 years has been focused on competition, conflict, and defence. As this report makes clear, safety will not come from the military. It doesn't come from ignoring our neighbours, and it doesn't come from ignoring the scale of the climate problems that the Pacific faces. It comes from working alongside our neighbours to ensure people's lives are protected through regulations and working conditions, but also through working together to combat the climate crisis. It comes from a peaceful, independent, stable, and connected Pacific. And investing in a fossil-free Pacific maritime fleet that's owned and crewed by the Pacific would be a significant contribution that Australia could help. Having those common rules, meeting those safety goals, those are really important mid-term goals that this report sets out. Of course, that is what should be a part of a much braver and stronger leadership that Australia should take on climate, and Australia needs to take. But I welcome this report. I welcome the way it provokes thoughts about what Australia's relationship with the Pacific should be. I welcome its recommendations, and I'm keen to see how myself and my party, the political movement that I represent, can be part of the broader political support for making these recommendations come into reality. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Senator. And I think that's exactly what we'd hoped from this paper. I feel in many ways it's a call to action paper. It's talking about the importance of a problem. It's saying that Australia needs to set ourselves goals and we need to show leadership. There's a range of ways that can be done that we set out, but I think that idea of having our clear goals and showing the leadership is absolutely key. So I'm conscious, as you've been speaking, Senator, we've got some comments from 3 of our different working group members, which is fantastic, and there may be more coming in as I speak. Thanks from Omarete Taparuka, who's from the Pacific community, and he's talked a bit about the Pacific Island Domestic Ship Safety Program and what it's doing in terms of improved safety of domestic shipping through legal and technical assistance. So thank you for sharing that, Omarete, and thank you for being part of the process. I also note that we have a comment from Nahur Rahman, another one of the working group members, who has enjoyed having the summary today of Australia's engagement with Pacific neighbours, and thanks Elisa from AMSA for her comments. I think the very positive thing to hear that the support from Australia does help, that there are things that we can do and that it does help, but there are still more things we can do in terms of interaction that can enhance safety. And that's only possible if we really build trust between communities. And of course, that involves Australia listening more than we often do and working with the Pacific rather than trying to lead in that way. And I'd also like to note that another one of our working group members, Peter Nuttall, has put in a comment. He's particularly excited that Australia is now talking about coming to the party on the immense challenge of decarbonising domestic shipping. It's an area he's been researching for many years, and there's now an international research network looking at these issues around newer and cleaner ships. So his plea is for Australia not to reinvent the wheel, but to really integrate its leading role with what already has been done. And he's given us a link to that. So, Senator, you wanted to respond to that?
No, I think I was being a little aggressive in the chat. I was going to say to Peter, we would love to get into contact and see how we can promote that work, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and knowing that work is on board and already happening, I think is critical. I was intending to type that though.
Oh, perfect. No, please do. And please do get in touch. That's one of the great things about being involved in AP4D work. Now, I've also got my neighbour, if I may say, Karen van Strookert from the University of New England. She's talking about the ambitions around decarbonisation, and she's interested in reversion to traditional sail power, which I think you can see a little bit in the paper, though it to some ways it's being mixed with newer technologies, Karen. So there's a discussion of, for example, autonomous vehicles that work on solar power, which can be used, for example, for cargo. So there's a range of ways. There might be older technology and newer technologies that we look at. So I might go back to both the Senator and Elisa to see if you have anything you wanted to add after seeing those comments. I'll start with you, Senator, and then Elisa, if you've got anything more to add, just come in.
Well, I think first of all, it just shows the importance of having the dialogue, because unless we come together using our ears every bit as much as our mouths from the Australian political context, we're probably going to misallocate resources and misallocate a pretty narrow band of political attention when it comes to the Pacific. I'm personally, strongly committed to this concept of decarbonising shipping, and I think learning from initiatives that are happening in the Pacific is really important. Most people that you speak to seem to talk about a kind of hydrogen or a similar fuel-based response to global shipping challenges. But I think looking at how we can harness sun and wind as part of that as well, I think would be really critical. And imagine if we had an investment in that kind of shipbuilding in Australia, but we also look to having some of that investment happening in Pacific Islands as well. And we view this as a collective Pacific initiative, because the Pacific absolutely needs shipping to stay connected. We're going to need zero carbon shipping. And wouldn't it be an extraordinary opportunity to build that shipping in the Pacific, to see it owned by the Pacific, see it crewed by people from the Pacific, and see it safe?
Good. Well, I'll go to Elisa, and then I might go to Rhonda to see if you have anything you'd like to add. So, Elisa, have you got any responses to those questions and comments?
Yes. Thank you, and thank you to those writing questions and seeking our feedback. I'd have to agree in a lot of ways with what Nura Rahman said, which is that trust and partnership is absolutely critical to everything that we do within the region and to building maritime capability and regional cooperation. So that is something that is very front of mind for us as well, and we are very conscious that the Pacific, of course, are the experts in Pacific needs and in how that we can best assist them. So that is something that we are very mindful of when we are developing our programs and rolling them out. Thank you.
Thank you. And in that spirit, Rhonda, would you like to come back in and respond to any of the comments you've heard?
Thanks. And I do have the SPC team on the line as well. And I did capture some of these comments in the previous reflections I'd made. But just to also acknowledge that we've also been, listening to the members and the advocacy around decarbonization in the maritime transport space, but also recognizing that in alignment with that is a call for just getting on top of the maritime safety issue as well. And so how do we reconcile the two, in the efforts that we're taking with our members around this? There is work we're doing around trying to support decarbonization in SPC, in and around the work through the MTCC initiative, capacity building for climate mitigation in the maritime shipping industry. But also, yeah, just that acknowledgement of whilst we're trying to decarbonize into the future and now, and how important that is, we're also recognizing the importance of just anchoring that work within the maritime safety space itself. So we have safe in there. Thank you.
Because they are both such important priorities. They have to happen simultaneously. Absolutely. No, look, thank you. And can I say thank you to everyone who has spoken today, and thank you to everyone who is involved in the paper. So we just put in the chat again a big thanks to all of those who were involved in consultations. And if you want to follow up some of their work, some of the things that they have been doing in this area, sometimes for many decades, please do. I think there's a lot of expertise there. And as people said, we don't want to reinvent that wheel. We want to work on that, taking that to a wider audience. On that basis, please do have a look at the website. If you have not had a look at the paper yet, I hope we whetted your appetite and you would like to go on now. And do share it. Do share it with your networks. Do help other people see that this is an important issue and the one that we should have a view on. And if I can say from an AP4D perspective, we'd love to keep staying involved with you. Our job is to be a platform to take great ideas into the policy debate. So please do subscribe to our mailing list. You'll see whatever the topics we're working on at any given time. And if any of those are of interest, you can become part of them too. So the next papers we're going to be doing, we'll be looking at what does it look like to have a whole of nation approach to foreign policy, something that is now entered into the political lexicon, and we've got to work out what does that mean. We're also looking at using all tools of statecraft in the information space, a very difficult and contested space. And we're also looking at enhancing Australia's relationships in the Indian Ocean. So if you have an interest in any of those topics, please do get in touch and please do connect with us on social media so you're aware of what we're doing at any time. So if I can finish us off, I like giving people 5 minutes to go and get a break before their next meeting or whatever it is that you have in your life. So we're giving you back that time, enjoy it. But I just can finish by thanking everyone on the AP4D team. We do so much to make these possible, and I think sometimes we make it look easy. It isn't. It's a very long and difficult process to work through with people, to listen hard, to synthesize those ideas, and then to push them out as much as we can. So thanks to the team, thanks to everyone who's spoken today, and thanks to everyone who made this possible.